Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrived by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 155, we sit down with Angela De Vito, a lifelong advocate for working people in the North Fork community. Angela's story begins with her family's move from Greenwich Village out to Rocky Point, and from there her path has taken her all over the country, from Chicago to Utah to Boston, before coming home to South Jamesport. Along the way, she's worked at the intersection of labor rights, public health, and civic life, from advancing workplace protections and training programs to serving on school and community boards and even running for Riverhead Town Supervisor. In our conversation, Angela reflects on the values that have guided her, the challenges and victories of public service, and her hopes for the future of Riverhead and the North Fork. So I hope you enjoy episode 155 with Angela De Vito. This episode was recorded May 16th, 2025. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. It's really nice to have you on today.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored to have been invited. And I know I put you off for a while, but I'm here and I'm really excited about doing this. And again, I thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so just to start off in the beginning, can you start by telling us a little bit about where you were born and raised first?
Sure. I was born in New York City in Manhattan's West Village. My parents had both grown up there. My mother was from Thompson Street and my father was from Morton Street. And as a very young child, I lived on St. Luke's Place with my parents until we moved out to Rocky Point in 1951. At that particular time, Rocky Point was, believe it or not, I mean, if you go through it today, it's hard to imagine. It was a very, very rural area. Mm-hmm. The population in the summer swelled to great numbers, but in the winter, year-round population was maybe 150, 200 individuals. Elementary school was kindergarten through 8th grade. The principal of the school, I was lucky enough to get one of the Edgar family legacy educators, Joseph Edgar himself. He was our principal and he was one of my teachers. It was an amazing place. We had still had a lot of farming. As a young child, I would ride my bicycle over to actually a Halleck, branch of the Halleck family in Rocky Point, to buy eggs from Charles Halleck, and he hand candled all of them and showed me how he did this, and then he'd always try to con me into taking one of his barn cats home. My mother said, no, enough animals as it is. It was very idyllic, I would say. I felt very lucky in elementary school to have such amazing instructors, dedicated people who wanted all of us to learn and do our best. And it was very close-knit. At times, it was everybody in the world knew who you were, where you lived, and where you shouldn't be. And in the event that you were someplace you shouldn't be, someone got a phone call. Also was the age of, I don't know if you're familiar with party lines.
Not as familiar.
So as a kid, it was great fun to pick up on these lines and listen to neighbors' conversations. But it was, we lived close to the beach. We lived in Rocky Point. There's a section of it called the North Shore Beach Association, and that's where we lived. And, that was my backyard. Every day I was out down on the beach with my dogs, and it was an amazing place to grow up.
And how was that? I was curious how that transition was from New York City to coming out to more that. How old were you at that time?
I was 3.
Oh, okay. So
I was very young.
Oh, okay. But even your parents making that decision to.
It was, we had a one-bedroom apartment is what my parents had. And there was at that time in the post-Second World War, early 50s in New York City, there was a housing shortage. And that actually fostered some of the initial movement out from the 5 boroughs into Suffolk County by war veterans and their families. But now my dad worked in Manhattan during the week, and we were out here. For my mom, it was a huge getting used to. Had lots of time spending trying to adapt to it.
Yeah.
She didn't drive. She didn't drive until she was in her late 50s. So we were totally dependent upon neighbors to take us anywhere. The nearest grocery store we lived about 2 miles from the main village of Rocky Point itself. And you'd have to walk in that. And we depended upon my dad, who came out on weekends to bring most of the foodstuffs to us. But my mother knew where the fisherman was to get and who had good vegetables. And so it was, and she gradually acclimated to it as, because she knew we weren't going back.
And did your parents grow up in Manhattan as a child?
Yes.
As well?
Yeah, both my parents were born and raised in Manhattan, in the West Village. In West Village, there's a small enclave of Italian Americans that is kind of like an outpost of Little Italy around the Morton Street, Jones Street area and that. So that's where we were, we lived 1 block away from, I don't know if you're familiar with the Zito's bread, but famous village bread store and such. And that was where they were raised.
Wonderful. And then you mentioned your childhood growing up there, and even coming out of high school. Did you know what you wanted to do?
Coming out of high school, part of what happened to, I think, people in my generation, you were classified in high school as someone going to college and someone not going to college. And I was put in that group going to college. So I never gave a thought to other pathways, career pathways. At that particular point in my life, it was, I'm going to college. And I wanted to get out and explore, quite frankly. And I had a deal with my dad. Any school east of the Mississippi River I could apply to. And if I got in, I would go. And that's how I wound up in Chicago.
Okay.
I knew nothing about the University of Chicago. When I applied to it as a senior in high school, I had to travel into Manhattan to the Plaza Hotel for an interview with a team of people from University of Chicago who were interviewing potential candidates for their new first-year class. And the first words out of one of the interviewers was, "How did you find us? You're the second person in 20 years from Suffolk County to apply to us."
Wow.
And I said, and so I relayed to them. I said, I took out a map. My father said it had to be east of the Mississippi River, so that's why I picked you. I had no idea other than I did know they had a very excellent classics department. And it was my dream in life to be a classics instructor or a historian, one or the other. But that all changed when I got to Chicago.
Okay. And actually, I wanted to ask one other question. When growing up in Rocky Point, did you ever vacation out on the North Fork or South Fork?
We came out, my family and I would come to Riverhead and go and come further north, further east on many occasions. My father in particular liked, and I forget it's the beach on Route on 48 on North Road now. It's one of the town of South Hole beaches because he would surf cast there. Because you used to be able to do and get striped bass when I was a kid. You could still do that. They still would come in and we would come out and picnic and utilize the area. And it was just, I was very much aware of the area here and became actually more aware of it. My older sister became a elementary school teacher, 5th grade teacher in Riverhead School District. And because of her living out here, when I would come home, I would visit and we would travel around and do stuff. So that was sort of my introduction to the North Fork.
Nice. And then so back to Chicago, you said you were interested in classics, but did you end up switching once you got there to a different?
Well, my first 2 years at Chicago was spent, I did pursue the classics. I pursued classical Greek, and I had finished 5 years of Latin in high school, so I continued with that, and then I got into Middle Eastern histories and studies and such. And then the summer of my second year was the 1968 Democratic Convention. So my father asked me to come home from Chicago. So I basically resigned from the university at that point, came back to Long Island, and with some friends started an art gallery in Port Jefferson.
Oh, wow.
And we had a lot of fun setting it up. And we actually created for the village of Port Jefferson its first annual art show, outside art show. We were told by the Chamber of Commerce, who would not allow us to become members, that it would be a big failure. We had so many artists who responded to us, I was overwhelmed. And having been out of school for a year, and then knowing my father was disappointed that I was not pursuing an undergraduate degree with any much interest at that point, I decided to go back to school after a little bit over a year of being in business and trying to support myself. So I went back to school and enrolled in the School of General Studies at Columbia University.
Okay.
And there I did switch my major to anthropology and graduated from there.
Mm-hmm. But during your college years, you helped organize a mentorship program with the Black Stone Rangers?
Yes, my first year in Chicago, there was a nascent program at that particular point, and I volunteered to be part of it, not really knowing what to expect, what would be expected of me. Mm-hmm. Growing up in Rocky Point, we were fairly much, and I'm sure that many people are familiar with, Suffolk County was a fairly segregated county by communities. And initially up until the early 60s, there was a significant African-American population at the regional high school in Port Jefferson. And then with increased populations in that, they carved out, and all of those young people who were primarily from Gordon Heights, Coram, Middle Island were sectioned off. So I went to a fairly segregated high school. I had never been exposed or immersed into African-American culture. So for me, working there was a real eye-opener doing that work. It was the first time I think I realized, and I know this sounds really naive, that people didn't, I knew there were people who were poor. There were poor people growing up in Rocky Point, but it never really dawned on me and how that affected what they could do in their lives or do with their lives. And the poverty on the south side of Chicago. Today, the Kensington area, University of Chicago, was in between the Kensington area and Cottage Grove. At that point in time, those were two very large African-American communities and pockets of extreme poverty and disadvantage in the city of Chicago. Kensington, of course, is where Barack Obama lived.
Yes.
It changed a lot when he moved there, quite frankly. It had, in the years from when I was there, it changed tremendously. And working with this program and getting young people just aware of how you apply for college, just even sharing those skills, gave to me the gift of organizing my thoughts and on how do I share with you how to go about getting financial aid? How do I share with you finding out about what college you may be interested in? What are your interests? What do you think you'd like to do in that? Mm-hmm. And it was a real give and take, and I learned a lot from the Black Stone Rangers. Were a well-known gang, one of the largest, earliest gangs in the Middle West cities of the United States, and they had a very bad reputation. They were very tough guys for the most part, and the women, but this was their community-based project, and they were very helpful. And what was good about it was every time I sort of crossed the line or was not respectful enough, they would let me know. They'd pull me back. Say, come on.
Well, don't do it that way. We're going to do this, or hold on that.
Yeah. This is, you don't say those things.
Okay.
Don't ask the questions. I was told, wait for people. One of the things, the person who mentored me, part of the gang, was the fact he said, wait for people to share with you information. So I learned to listen more rather than just jumping in with my thoughts.
Okay. Wow. And then I guess you were at Columbia, and then from there, did you start working in other parts of the country?
From Columbia, I went to Salt Lake City.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. My husband at the time was a medical student, and we went to Salt Lake City. So, because he got into medical school there, because it was very cost effective too, very cheap.
And then, so you've also worked at the intersection of science, public health, and labor, from coal country clinics to major OSHA reforms. What accomplishments in that chapter of your life are you most proud of?
I think the thing that I am most proud of for all of that work was that I was member of two groups. One was called Science for the People, that came out of the OSHA, OSHA movement. I was part of that, vocalizing to get the legislation passed, even when I was still at Columbia. And the ability to, and the other thing was what were called committees of occupational safety and health. These were for lack of a better word, layperson committees who in their workplaces would be negotiating the conditions of work as they related to health and safety, people who did hazard identification. And I think the greatest joy I got out of all of that was sharing at that point, my science background, because I had done a lot of work in science and I was in a master's program for occupational safety and health, occupational medicine, actually, to be able to take complex, even for me, complex concepts in toxicology and have people understand, or this is information you need to go from step 1 to step 2, and having them take command of the decision making for themselves. Part of what I learned at that point was that my role wasn't to be the one who says this is how you should do it and this is what you have to do, and then create a dependency upon me to be there. My role was to share the information that I had in a way that was useful to them, so then I could leave and go do something else. Mm-hmm. And they were still able to do the work that people wanted to do. It was part of a huge national movement to create better working conditions during the early 70s and 80s and into the 90s. I mean, it still existed. There was, and when I came to work in New York State in occupational safety and health in Albany, the uphill battle was people who work in public sector there's no hazards in their work. And I would say, well, my first day on the job, I had to go to a scene of an accident in which a social worker in a state psychiatric hospital was stabbed 22 times in her face by a client. And we can't control, to the degree we can control clients. But what happened was she had been placed in an office at the end of a hallway, no telephone, which she could have just simply knocked off and someone would have said, oh, there's a busy signal coming in from this line, and there would have been help. So she had sustained injuries that took close to 30 plastic surgeries to correct. I said, so there are hazards, and everything we can do to bring those down, the impact, potential impact, and anticipate what can happen as close as we can get to zero, that's what we have to do.
Mm-hmm. And when did you get interested in that, the idea with labor and workforce, even with regulations or safety? My
interest with organized labor came out of my work at the University of Utah. I worked for the Division of Pulmonary Diseases as a cardiopulmonary technician, and conditions were horrible. We had one technician a shift, which meant that you had no breaks, no dinner hour. I mean, I learned to eat a plate of French fries and a grilled cheese sandwich while walking down a hallway on not a cell phone at those times, but just a portable phone we used to carry, getting instructions on where they needed me in the hospital. No breaks whatsoever. And at that time, AFSCME was a very large impetus in organizing public sector workers. So I sat down with one of their organizers and tried to organize lab workers at the university. And I got called in by my boss, who said, listen, the administration wants to know who's the communist in our midst. And I said to him, so do you think I'm a communist still? He said, no. He said, you're just a New Yorker in Salt Lake City. And it was, and I just became interested in, with that, looking at the power that being part of a union gave people. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the contribution that unions make that I think was overlooked. For example, the OSHA Act, in part, passed because of organized labor being there, making their voices heard, and pounding on doors in Washington, D.C. I mean, imagine getting Richard Nixon to sign it. He did in 1971, So
yeah.
It's that, and I felt at home with organized labor. Mm-hmm. I was very comfortable with the concept of that. Yes, I do come and sell my labor, but that doesn't mean that I should not have dignity, respect on the job, that I should not have a voice on how things get done. It was that for me, it was the venue to bring ideas on how to make your workplace better forward, and not so much a top-down sort of mentality, which yes. I did not work well under that sort of arrangement. So it was something, and I just kept meeting people, all different unions. It was easy in Salt Lake City. There was one labor hall, and every union in the state of Utah had an office there. So you could just walk in and sit down and talk with everybody. I mean, it was that way in Montana, that way in Colorado. And it was an exciting time because OSHA was taking off in the 70s, and there was a lot there. I mean, my graduate work at the University of Utah was the result of the OSHA Act creating the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. And through that, as the research arm for OSHA, they created these educational resource centers. And the Rocky Mountain Center was one of the first to be established in the United States. And I was in its first class. Wow. It was really great. It just was really exciting.
Mm-hmm. And I had a question more. So when you returned to New York, you helped create protections for workers exposed to asbestos, bloodborne pathogens, and other hazards. What was it like navigating state politics as a technical expert and advocate?
Well, I was considered, because I worked for the Public Employees Federation. I worked as their director of occupational safety and health. So I was given access to, as a tech, they acknowledged that I just wasn't someone who was there going to take up their time. My reception with the legislature was, regardless of the side of the aisle, was always very, very welcomed, because I didn't bring it was like, I am of this political party and you're there and I can't, I'm here because there's real issues. And I always would prepare in that, like when the Commissioner of Health, David Axelrod at the time, announced that in New York State, he was banning smoking in public places. That included all of the offices and work sites for every public worker in the state of New York. And I immediately responded with, while we appreciate and recognize clearly the hazards from smoking and the hazards from secondhand smoke, because some of these workplaces were horrific. I mean, people, they chain smoked at work. I mean, the difference between then and now is like, wonderful. But I would walk into places like the Alfred E. Smith building, and I would walk into audit units, and there would be this haze of smoke above all of these workers. It was just, and then people would complain about air quality, and I would say, hey, stop smoking. But
stop it in the building too. And was that through the 80s and all the way up?
That was in the 80s and through the 90s. And the thing is that something like that, navigating with that. I mean, I had issued this statement that, we recognize the hazards but it becomes for us in the workplace a term and condition of employment, so you have to negotiate with us. So I got a call from Dave Axelrod in the Governor's Office of Employee Relations saying, "What are you, nuts?" I said, "No." I said, "Listen, you are changing. When people were hired, they did not sign on and say as an employee that they accepted all of these rules, and one of them was that they don't smoke." I said, we have a lot of smokers in the workplace, but let's work to make them non-smokers, not by saying, "Oh, you cut off and you can't do." So what can we do for smoking cessation programs? So we sat down and we negotiated this. And, it was people volunteer, basically in their own way coming about to give up smoking in the workplace. We did have sites where there were smoking rooms established outside of the building where people could go and do that. That did exist. And it was, a slow, step-by-step process there. And that's one of the things I learned about navigating with them and making choices about funding. New York State was the first state to have what was called the right to know law. And that's, okay, what's in this stuff? That's what it was. And about 3 or 4 years into it, and they had an incredible technical unit in the Department of Health. I mean, Dave Axelrod he's like my hero commissioner of all times. He was fabulous. And, but he would, Mario Cuomo was governor at the time, and he decided that this unit had done enough work and they were going to cut back because they needed money elsewhere. And, unlike locally here, when we hear our budgets for our local government, state budget used to have hearings on various, and when the health budget came up, I had mimeographed a whole bunch of things as to why the right to know law unit needed to be put back into the budget, and walked into the hearing room and had leafleted every seat there. And then you were able to get up after the Commissioner of Health gave his spiel about what he wanted in his budget, and able to say what you wanted. And I said, it's very important. It's not really a waste of time to let people know. People need to make decisions about their own health. And at that time, when you have information, you need to be informed so you can make a decision that makes sense to you as an individual and to the greater workforce that's out there. And they restored the money. So... But later on rescinded it. So not that same year, but a couple of years later.
Yes. And I wanted to ask, just with you working all over across the country, what do you think was the most, not even the most challenging state, but just in terms of getting things done labor-wise or fighting for workers, what do you think was the most difficult or challenging project you've worked on?
I would say that the most challenging project was coming back to New York State. I was in Albany, and then in 1989 I came back to Long Island and the North Fork, and I worked at SUNY Stony Brook. I was part of the newly created Division of Occupational Medicine. I was the associate director there. And that clinic, setting those up, one of the things, the missing pieces in occupational safety and health, amongst some other missing pieces, was the fact of workers having access to physicians who were not hired by their employers and were people who were actually trained in how to evaluate occupational exposures and establish that link between the occupational exposure and what is presenting the health outcome that's presenting itself in clinic. And it was a movement that came out of these committees for occupational safety and health around the state. And what we tried to do was set up a statewide occupational medicine and clinic network. And the question always was, how is it going to be funded? And we funded it by taking part of the monies from the New York State Workers' Compensation System. It was administered through the Department of Health. But I would say establishing that At that particular point, there's always players who think that they are more equal than others, and that's on both sides of the line of the aisle there. It always is.
Yeah.
And I would say for me, that was the hardest part of creating a program because there was a lot of, I would say, in-house jealousies, especially amongst physicians. That made it difficult in establishing it. We'd gotten to the point where we had the legislation that gave us the money. We were setting up, and things at one point I thought were not going to take off because of this sort of intra friction that was there. Who was going to be, was Mount Sinai going to be the king of occupational medicine in New York State? Or I worked for a physician who, his ego could have filled this room and the whole library. But he also was great in what he did. He was a phenomenal physician. He worked for the Steelworkers, United Steelworkers of America, and he was just ready and able to go anywhere in the United States. And it was through him that I was able to go to places like Labrador in the middle of winter, Montana in the middle of winter, to work on various health studies and such. But I would say the hardest piece was putting together that clinic network and making it, having it become stable and sustainable over time. There was a lot of things that needed to be worked out that I think all of us had not anticipated. Most of us, were used to, in healthcare, walking into an established clinic, and here you are having to do, okay, do I need a New York State Article 28? Do I need this? I mean, just all of those things, as well as the politics of, who is going to be king of the hill. So that was... Yes. No, that's... It made it at times very difficult. But we had, I will say, from Long Island, the Long Island Federation of Labor, as well as the Nassau-Suffolk Building and Construction Trades Council, we had tremendous support from them. They just truly were there, had our backs, and were pushing all the time. And we did. I mean, as a clinic, we went out and we did mobile health fairs. They were health fairs for the whole family. But the specific part that we did was the asbestos exposure-related examinations. And we would go out and, let's say at a local union hall, do 200 patients in a weekend, examine them and oftentimes found disease that they did not know they had. So, we did this and offered other services. Like we would come out to the vineyards to do Lyme disease screening. And actually, Karim Massoud, we discovered he had Lyme disease after we screened them there. And the really great thing about that was the cooperation we got from the language departments at SUNY Stony Brook. Because we had all the materials, letters and such translated mostly into Russian, Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Polish, and Spanish, so that people would understand what we were doing and what the results meant for them. So.
And even just looking at your time in the medical field, how has that area evolved even from the 70s and 80s and 90s? Do you think, like, in terms of some of the projects you've worked on and seeing people today work on things, obviously with a lot of the labor the unions have decreased since the 70s and 80s, but just that whole dynamic of labor and health today has probably changed quite a bit.
Yes, I think I don't think we have taken a step backwards, but I think that we sort of are just where we were in the 90s and even a bit beyond that, where we were after 9/11. Because that was an occupational exposure for the people, for the first responders, as well as the individuals in the buildings who did manage to survive. And I think it became a matter of, as the economy in the United States, I think, sort of shifted into, being leaner and under the language of efficiency, occupational safety and health was always seen, even by some of the unions. I mean, they They had departments in that, but it was sort of the dotted line in the organizational chart. Mm-hmm. It wasn't truly what many of their people saw, their leadership saw as their mission. What they did see was, the thing for accessible health care for their members. I believe has increased. I think has gotten better. But with occupational health and environmental health, for many of them, there was always and especially getting into environmental health, the kind of loggerheads with the environmental and conservationist individuals. So it was difficult to spend time trying to sort through all of that and say, the mission still here is no worker today, in this day and age, should be exposed to asbestos. We know everything, shame on us. In 1927, we knew it caused lung disease, and we did nothing about it. But we know it, and we know how to control it. We have the technology, we have the training, do it. Mm-hmm. I still do and sponsor OSHA training courses in the OSHA standards for workers. We just, through my work in the Department of Labor, we just concluded a Spanish language one. We had close, I think, 22 individuals they gave up 4 weekends to complete it. So, it's a lot.
Yes. And then you mentioned coming back to Long Island at Stony Brook, but when did you make your way further out to Jamesport area?
Well, I returned in 1989, and in 1990, actually the very next year, I moved out to Mattatuck. I lived on Bungalow Lane in Mattatuck, and I lived there until 2000 in Mattatuck. And then the housing boom was up. My landlord wanted to sell his house. I couldn't afford it. So I scurried to look, and I said, okay, I'm going to look in Riverhead. I'm going to look in South Jamesport, because I had spent some time with my kayaks down there. A nice, very nice beach community, and there was a house that I could rent. So I moved in, and I've been there. Well, actually, I moved next door from the first house I lived in, and I've been there ever since. Wow. So it's and it's been, for me, I envision. And I don't envision, but I see the North Fork as sort of the last stand of my childhood. Love of open space and the water and clean water and being able to swim and catch a blowfish and watch killies come in and, horseshoe crabs and all of those things. And I feel very passionate about, I understand the need to have motion going forward, to change things. I'm not someone who believes in that, but I don't think we have spent enough time to look at the lessons in our heritage, the legacy that we have here. I mean, when they passed the Community Preservation Fund Act, the motto was too good to lose. And they interviewed local farmers at that time who were saying, if there was a way that they could stay on their land, they would do it. And the diversification. I mean, when I was a kid, it was string beans, cabbage, cauliflower, potatoes, ducks. It's a lot more now. And, so it's so beautiful. I mean, I love driving around the town of Riverhead. There's big open spaces. It's gorgeous. And I always think, why would they want to build here? Why do they want to do this? Because, if you look at realistically, building more housing doesn't necessarily increase your revenue stream and to sustain taxes for people. Our taxes continue to go up. In the town of Riverhead, the last 5 years, our taxes have gone up close to 20%. That's huge. And I think the hardest thing to navigate in Riverhead politically is saying, there are examples of how we can develop, what we can do to clean our water. And they're right around us. Well, we're not the town of Southold. There's that kind of parochialism that seems to be infused on the East End, on the North Fork. But I wish everyone would appreciate that the entire North Fork, starting actually in Northport, is by the state of New York's Division of Parks Preservation and Historic Preservation, is a state heritage area. okay, where we're supposed to celebrate and look at things that are part of our heritage. And I just enjoy living here. I just really do. I have my favorite stand for asparagus. I go somewhere else for peas. And I've become an avid gardener. When I first moved to Mattatuck, I enrolled in the Cornell Master Gardening course. And since then, it's just, it's like for me, it's the way I relax.
Yes.
I'm an early riser. I'm usually up 4:30, 5 o'clock. And now with the weather being better, I'm out in my garden for an hour in the morning, it's just fantastic. It's a beautiful place to live. And I really wish that more people would kind of just stop and really take in the beauty of it. We have tremendous talent here. And if we reach out to that talent, I really believe we can come up with ways in which to sustain ourselves, sustain quality of life out here without having to tax you through the roof.
Yes.
I just think we do. And I think there needs to be, I understand, the town pride, everyone their hometown, home rule. We have our own little town governments. But I think here on the East End, it's time for us to start looking at a way in which to regionalize our approach to the solutions for some of the issues, how we implement them, what aspect of it we may take or may not take, is something that can be left up to your local government in your town. But let's look at, how do we deal with the spring now and then through the summer and fall, the traffic issues. That's not just a Southold issue. It's not just a Riverhead issue. It's our issue. And we need to work together on that. I think we just need to take the time and begin talking about those things.
And do you think, since being out here, even when you first moved to Mattatuck, have Southold and Riverhead worked together through that time, or you think there's always been somewhat of a divide?
I think the divide still exists. The biggest divide is between Riverhead and Southampton. But with Southold, Riverhead has always been looked at, you're really not part of the North Fork. I mean, and yes. I look at us, we're the gateway to it. You can't get to the South Fork or North Fork without us. So, you have that type of, that's entrenched. Even though, you have families who they have farmed and they have relatives that cross the town lines, it's that. I just think there needs to be more cooperation, and Riverhead, when Riverhead became its own sort of seat in, 1792 or something like that, they didn't really look at what was the burgeoning Southold government, part of which has the trustees for water quality and the waterways and land, which is a tremendous boon to having reason when you look at what you want to do when you want to develop. When I see some of the projects in the town of Southold that have been put on hold or who have not been allowed to go forward, I think in Riverhead it would have been, boom, we're done. It's gone. We're doing it. And I don't think it's a bad thing to look to your neighbor and see, gee, they've done something well. I don't have to replicate it 100%, but there's parts of it that I can utilize. I think it's more efficient in how you run local government. It allows people to have a greater voice in local government with that, but there is that divide there. It's we, as you probably know, Riverhead was, when the Community Preservation Act came through, Riverhead decided to bond money so that they could get a jump start on buying development rights. But then the 2008-2009 hit and nothing was being preserved. Nothing happened. They couldn't afford it. So they had this big bond debt to deal with. And my thing is that the Peconic Area Community Preservation Act was created for the entire East End. And I understand the bureaucracy and the rules for dividing monies that come out of sales in your local area. But to me, those monies should be used for preservation for the entire region. Now, we in Riverhead have gone to Southampton and asked them if they could just lend us some money interest-free, so that we could get out of our debt and once again begin preserving. We have the greatest number of farm acres. We have 15,000 acres of farmland in the town of Riverhead, which is more than all combined the 4 East End towns have. Okay, we have preserved 7,200 acres there, have been preserved. We still have a long way to go. We have a lot of open space also. And this would help us. And the response that we received was, we're not your bankers. And yet, they sit on $38 million in the bank.
Do they get the biggest amount, I think, out of all the...
East Hampton does. East Hampton has bazillion bucks.
They don't know what to do with?
Well, they do things like preserve bowling alleys and marinas and that sort of thing. They've begun utilizing the 20% that they can for water quality projects. But to me, it doesn't make sense that if it's a region, for example, we have the 2 national estuaries, Long Island Sound and the Peconic Bay. Peconic Bay, we've wanted to clean up for a long time. If Southampton does some cleanup work, spends money on water quality, improving, limiting runoff and all the rest of this, but the rest of us are not doing the same thing, it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, it needs to be a group effort.
It needs to be a group effort. We need to sit down and, approach this on a regional basis. And you want to use those monies, use them. That's fine.
Yes. But also you've been involved and served on the civic boards out here, the school board and advisory committees, and also ran for Riverhead Town Supervisor.
Twice.
Just looking back, what did the most recent campaign teach you about the community and about yourself?
About myself as a candidate, I knew that I had to be out in the community talking to people. And I think that when I made the decision to run for office a second time, I should have clearly looked at my age. It's difficult. I walked 1,500 homes myself during that campaign. I probably should have walked 3,000, but I just didn't. I'm not 21 anymore. And that was the realization there. But I think it was also, I broke my rule of listening to people. I was so enmeshed with that we have to change EPCAL, because I was part of the EPCAL watch group, one of the founders of it, and that I stopped listening. The lesson coming out of it was that I have to go back to remember that I have to listen and find the common ground in which we can work together on something if I want to move forward. I think also that it taught me something locally, which is why I believe that local government needs to be so open and participatory for individuals, is that so many people had no idea whatsoever when I would knock on their door that there was even going to be an election in November.
Yes.
Or that when you would ask them, are there issues, things that you think need more attention, and how would you like it to be done? We're just going to say no, because they are so involved with, many of them, going out every day and making a living.
Yes.
Juggling their children, that are in school. So it was, how do I really kind of put in place, practice what I preach? Okay. That was the lesson that came out of that campaign. And even working with the civics earlier, was that I needed to listen more. I had moved a bit away from that. That was not right. And it's something that, I've been very mindful of ever since. People wanted the EPCAL contract to be broken.
What is that for people that might not know the
EPCAL is the Enterprise Park at Calverton. It's close to 2,000 acres of land that the town of Riverhead owns. We had sold off some of it. It was given to us after Grumman left with the F-14 fighter jet testing and building and repairing, as well as, they did build the moon module out there. And Riverhead was gifted with this land. for purposes of development. And, it's a concentrated area in Calverton. And we got it in, I think it was 1998. And we've never really been successful in coming up with. And in part, that's, one of the things that I see as needed for a town such as Riverhead is you have, regardless of who is heading up local government, you have to reach out and talk to them. You have to talk to Suffolk County. You have to talk to the state of New York. You can't be afraid of them. And that's sort of been a large part of the governmental environment in Riverhead for many years, and that we can do it on our own. We're not anybody else. We don't need them to do it. And so this EPCAL development, we were in the process of selling off all of the land to a Canadian organization run by a family whose last name are the Gamasians. And there was an upswell. They wanted to, at one point, introduce an airport. And we had voted down an airport in that area. So there was a huge groundswell of community members against this. And it was a big campaign issue. I mean, everywhere I went, I was asked what I would do. And I said, I feel that they were not qualified and eligible to be the developers there, and that the town needed to get out of this. We need to put the halt on this. And I know it's 26 years later, we're still putting the halt on stuff. Mm-hmm. But we need to do it right. If it's going to be a legacy for future generations, we need to do it right. Well, my opposition knew that, and they knew that they were in trouble. And they pull what, in politics we call the October surprises. Mm-hmm. And that's when they voted to break the contract with the organization that had been given the go-ahead to purchase the land. And the town wasn't going to get its $40 million for the sale of it. And people were very happy with that, so they voted them back into office. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's that story. But here we are 2 years later, and $200,000 in legal fees, and we're nowhere because we're in court. Those lands are tied up. We can't even show them to someone else who may want to develop them.
Yes. Also, you mentioned local government, and you've always emphasized that local government is where democracy is most tangible. What does good government mean to you in real everyday terms?
In real everyday terms, good government is a system that is easily accessible by the citizenry. They can participate. They are not told. And it's one that generates confidence and trust in the people that you've elected. You know that even though I may not have voted for you, Chris, but you took an oath of office, so now you do represent me, and you should give me the courtesy of listening to me. Local government should be a venue that educates people, empowers them, and makes them act in ways that's to the benefit of their local communities. They have to feel comfortable in that. And what would make it tangible is local government can't be an 8:30 to 3:30 operation. Mm-hmm. It just can't be. We have to come up with a way that is I've always been a proponent of a mixture of work environments, because I've been the beneficiary of working on collapsed work weeks. 3 days, I get it all done, and I have 4 days off, do other stuff, get into other mischief. So it's what would meet the needs of people, and holding meetings at what time, holding a meeting at 2:00 in the afternoon. If I really wanted to participate, it means I have to leave work, give up pay, and come to local government. Am I going to do that in today's environment? No. So I don't participate. So the level of engagement for me, civic engagement, just becomes fuming over things that I see that are wrong and shouldn't be done. But I don't have that because my local government is not organized in a way that makes my participation easy. Mm-hmm. I mean, they will tell you, write them a letter. So you send in letters. What do you do with the letters? You got 50 letters that said, you shouldn't allow people to spit on the street. So what are we doing about it? Okay. There's not that local government has to respond back. And I believe that when you ask people for their opinion, which does occur on occasion, and they give it to you, you go to public hearings. How do you use that information to make your decision as an elected official? We should know that, and people should be able to ask that. And that would, to me, make participatory democracy much more tangible if that type of give and take existed.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think that is something that I think we're struggling with today, not just here, but all across the country. But you've also touched on just talking with other people, and you've worked across the aisles and across generations. How do you approach listening to people who disagree with you, and how do you move forward in situations like that?
What I have learned, and what is, and I have to admit, is difficult, because of course I always think of what I have to say is worthwhile. No ego here. Is to listen to. Like when I was knocking on doors, the walk list I had included Republicans and conservatives. Mm-hmm. And I would get people who would say, "So what party are you?" And I would say, "Well, I'll tell you my party after you tell me what's important to you." Mm-hmm. And I would listen and we'd talk, and I'd say, "Well, my concern for having a traffic light on this particular end of this particular block, which is your major concern here, is one that I've been well aware of, because I have had issues with that coming to the end of that block and having to make a turn." I said, "And I think there's a way we can move forward with this. And how I would move forward with this is blah, blah, blah." And then I would say, "And I am a registered Democrat." You would get oh, kind of looks like that. But it's mostly listening to people and finding that common ground. Mm-hmm. There is always, I believe, a kernel of things that we share in common, because we socialize. Okay, we're at other venues. We go to, we support community activities, and we don't support them because it's not a Republican activity, it's not a Democratic Party, it's not a Green Party activity, it's a community activity. There's common ground for things, and you need to find that and build on that. I may not convince you to adopt my view of the world, but I may have you understand that I'm not necessarily working against you simply because you have a difference of opinion with me. Mm-hmm. That's sort of been my approach.
Yes. And I think that's really important at a local level, because I think when we see everything on the news on a state or federal level, it just seems like it's so divisive and people aren't working together. But I think that's something, I think in the end there are more common ground items that we would agree on than what we would disagree on.
Yeah. I believe you're right. Yeah. I think that the environment that we find ourselves in now is one in which, regardless of your particular ideology, we are in a reactive mode. And I don't know if that is by design or it's simply because we haven't been paying attention as well as we should. However, but we're in a reactive mode, and we're not, and where we have to get back to is we have to move away from that and become more proactive. We're talking about what is the future of healthcare in this country. It doesn't matter if so-and-so said this about Medicare or said this about, what is it that we want it to look like? Let's find a way. What works for you? What works for people in rural areas? Like, I think of the loss of monies for Planned Parenthood with its offices, one of its offices in Riverhead, which has never done pregnancy terminations, by the way. They never have done that there, nor have they done counseling there. They provide healthcare services for young women who normally would not go and take care of their health through traditional avenues and that, making appointments. Planned Parenthood has a very, very important role in our communities. And it's like, what can we do to keep that type of, that sort of service? What makes younger people go to that service? That sort of thing, and make that available to them. What do we do about people who, I work for the part-time for the Suffolk County Department of Labor in the correctional facility, getting people ready for reentry. I have so many people who believe that they can never vote again because they're a convicted felon. And I tell them, oh no, you're lucky to live in the state of New York, let me tell you. But it's those sorts of things that we need to be more proactive with. I said, and when you go with the population I work with, you will be making an application for a certificate of what's called good conduct or relief from disabilities in the future. I said, and you're going to be asked by either a panel of people or a judge, so what have you done to rehabilitate yourself? And if you can say, I started voting for the first time in my life, that's a sign of rehabilitation. So it's being positive about these rather than dwelling on, yes, I know that people who have been incarcerated, convicted of crimes, really don't get a fair second chance. But if I dwell on that, I'll never be able to do anything. I'll never be able to work with people because I'll be just focusing on that. And that's a battle that on a day-to-day basis is a lot larger than what I need to accomplish.
Yes, definitely. And then you've also touched on just Riverhead and some of the things you've noticed, but it is still changing pretty fast, and from farmland preservation to rising development pressures. What are your hopes for the future of the North Fork and its community down the line?
My hope for the future on the North Fork is that we will achieve the spirit of the Community Preservation Act. We will achieve and we will realize the change in our state constitution that gave us all the right to clean air, clean water, and good health. And we will arrive at, there are so many examples of how to develop yourself so that you have a sustainable economy that doesn't have to be strip malls, doesn't have to be big box stores. It's not like one size fits all. And my hope is that that spark of creativity that many of our residents have. I mean, I've sat and listened to people who have just like amazing. I went, oh my God, where did you get that idea from? But that's fantastic, and that we begin coalescing and using our local government to make those things that we believe in, the things that brought us here. I mean, one of the first things that I ask people is, why'd you come to the North Fork? You sold your house in Syosset, Garden City, and you're here on the North. Why did you come here? Well, I came here because it's quiet. I can hear birds. The water is beautiful. The vistas are great. I said, aha. And wouldn't you want those who come after you to have the same thing? So what can we do to ensure that? And that's my hope for them, is that we will. We will have the strength to say, as, for example, in West Hampton Beach, and this is very, very loosely put, a proposal for development comes into town. And let's say it's for an ice cream store. West Hampton Beach says, we already have 2. When you have a different idea, come back and we'll work with you. Something like Paul Pontieri and Patchogue. My door's open. If you got a good idea, come on in. That's what's helped Patchogue. Commitment to that sort of thing without doing things in secret. And just realizing that why people have come to the North Fork, why you live out here, why do people fight so much for their communities when something bad is really going to happen to them? We have to pass that on. That's our responsibility.
Yes.
That we have to do for young people. We talk a lot about how will we retain young people. Part of it is envisioning what we do for development, the sorts of opportunities for career-wise that's available here, rather than, for example, in Riverhead, the 2 biggest employers are Northwell Health and the school district.
Yes.
And local government was always looked upon as the place where I could get a job and then my child could get a job. It was this sort of, this entitlement here. And we have to think of ways when we talk about what is our vision for development, how does that translate out into jobs that will keep young people here?
Yeah.
And, I look at all of the, we have a lot of, as I said in Riverhead, we have a lot of farmland. Not all of it is under cultivation. Only 11,000, I think, or so acres of it is. But there are many people today, small farms can be not very profitable, but they can sustain people. Mm-hmm. You can earn a living and bring things in. Like I have a fellow instructor years ago. I used to teach at BOCES, and he bought 7 acres of land in town of Riverhead, and guess what he planted?
I don't know.
He planted 7 acres of hazelnut trees because he did research, and the North Fork has the largest areas of hazelnut tree growth is in Washington and Oregon State. That was his research told him that. And our environment here on Long Island is very similar to that. And hazelnut trees are amazingly resilient to winds as we get northeasters coming in and that. And that's what he did. And he has a very good income from his hazelnut farm. Okay, today. So small farms, encouraging people to go into agriculture, whether it be you do kelp farming, whether you are oyster farming, scallop farm, whatever it is you want to do, the whole aquaculture. There is so much in agriculture today that people can get involved in. It just isn't potatoes and cauliflower anymore. And you don't need 400 acres of land to do it. There was and we should be mentoring young people. There is a local farmer in Jamesport, a place called Biophilia. And Phil Barbado rented out his barn to a young woman who wanted to raise quail for the markets in New York City. Mm. And she started in his barn, and she has a great business today. Mm-hmm. She still rents farmland at acres that she needs, but she raises, that's what she does. And it's just, there's so many opportunities, but we have to think about what we want to do in development. I mean, I think that our agricultural heritage is something that we should really hone in on and celebrate and encourage to the greatest degree that we can. I think we sort of moved away from, because farming is a very arduous career, mm-hmm. But with smaller farms, different sorts of crops, I don't think it's as difficult it still is difficult. It's a 7-day-a-week job. That's true. But I don't think it's as difficult as those farmers before us had. Yeah. The times and issues that they had to, where markets were not good. For example, when the potato markets were not good, you had the wives of potato farmers on Long Island traveling to Congress to ask for relief because it cost them more to grow and harvest the potatoes than it did what they could sell them per pound on the market at that particular point in time. So I just think that we should reach into that. I'd like to see, one of my pet projects is I'd like to see us on the North Fork implement a student conservation league that would give young people an opportunity to see and learn more about not only what conservation and environmental jobs work is, but what is the whole range of work that can be done within mm-hmm. that. Land management is a part of it. With fires and firefighting, all of those things are involved with it that they can be doing. And I think that I would love to see us have, a cradle of agriculture like we have a cradle of aviation in Nassau County. Yes. I think we need a museum that dedicates itself and is interactive for young people, for them to really appreciate and to value what farming gives us. I have a little sticker on the back of my car that says, no farms, no food. And someone said to me, "Do you really believe that?" I said, "Well, where do you think your food's going to come from?"
Yeah.
Whether it be, we call them farms here in the East, and you go west of the Mississippi, they're called ranches. Okay. But, everything we have comes from people growing stuff, whether it's little animals or vegetables. But
I think, I think that's important. And I think I've had people on that have talked about Southold, and the young people out here especially they don't see as much of a future here for them, and they usually move away unless you have family, and then they can stay in that house or they take over that house. But is that's similar in Riverhead?
Yes, it
as
is.
well.
Yes, it is.
And the school systems are somewhat shrinking, at least here in Southold.
Riverhead keeps growing. Their graduating class. I mean, the difference is that I think in Greenport this year there's 52 graduating from the high school, and Riverhead is 418.
Wow.
So
that might be the whole Southold.
Yeah.
Or maybe even more.
Yeah, they are shrinking. As well, many people can't afford to live here, and we do have to address that. And we also, the answer to single-family homes, which was, that was a dream coming out of the Second World War, that this you save for, and we do this, and 2 cars in the driveway, to other alternates to it isn't the apartment buildings that Riverhead has been erecting downtown. I mean,
those are like condos that are very expensive.
They're very expensive. Majority and now everything that they're approving is only market value apartments. Mm-hmm. So you're looking and market value. Okay, town of Riverhead, the average income lags behind the average income for a family of 4 in Suffolk County by between $15,000 and $20,000 a year. Significant amount of money. You're looking at market value apartments going for $2,800 to $5,000 without utilities. And try to back into what that means you have to be earning. And the wages have not kept up. Wages on Long Island is not the mecca for high wage. I mean, there are high wage jobs here, I agree. Mm-hmm. But, for example, if you work in government, you work for the state of New York. Let's say you work as a wildlife biologist for the Department of Health. Upstate New York, you get the same salary as you get on Long Island doing the same work. Upstate New York, the houses are they're catching up, but they're about 2/3 the cost of what we have here for that. But it's coming up with and looking at different arrangements for housing. I mean, I would love to see on some of the land the concept of tiny homes, like container homes. Mm-hmm. There's beautiful, beautiful plans for these things. And just a mixture of these sorts of things that give people options and don't. And yet I also wonder about, when the housing goes up. I recently got a flyer for 2 openings for housing complexes, one in East Patchogue and one in Northport. And they were very reasonable rents. A 1-bedroom apartment, $950 a month. Reasonable rent. We can't seem to get that on the North Fork. I mean, I look in the newspaper every week, News Review, to see what's renting. A 2-bedroom home.
Yes.
They want $3,000 for it. Mm-hmm. Well, people have understood that their asset is really beginning to pay off. Okay, but we have to come up if families here want their children to stay in the area. Let's just say on the North Fork, on the East End. You may live on Shelter Island, or even though you were raised in Southold. You may live in Riverhead, even though you grew up in East Hampton, but you're still here. We have to understand that we need to address transportation, housing, access to services, all sorts of healthcare services, as well as jobs that don't have you unable to save any money. Mm-hmm. Social Security was never meant to pay for your full retirement. You were supposed to be able to put money away. People can't do that today with the cost of things. So we have to start looking a bit more comprehensively when we make a decision how it's going to impact in those areas and what do we want to do. And I think we also need to hear from young people. I mean, I just had a part of the Women's Club of Riverhead, and we just had our scholarship luncheon. And 5 high school students graduating this year. I don't think they're coming back here. They have tremendous plans for their lives, but they don't see this as a place for them to live in.
Yeah.
And I'd like to meet with them and have a regular dialogue on, what is it how is it that you see things, and what is it that you need? And young families too. People like myself, I don't mean to be morbid, but I'm not going to be around for another 25 years. I'm just not. I'm at that age where I know I'm not. And I've had my time to get my say in, make my voice heard, and I really would like to hear from young families and people still in high school. What are their expectations? And how do you think we should be doing it?
And I think it's getting them involved. And I know you mentioned even before that everyone's so or overworked or just tired. And even when we do have, I think, some town hall things out here or zoning updates, it's usually all people that are older that can attend those things, and the younger people, maybe they're working at that time or they can't make it out. But I think we do need to do that, because otherwise it's kind of just becomes a place for people that are just retired, and there's not a healthy cycle of living out here.
No, and there really can be. And I think that where I live in South Jamesport, I live on Green Street. Everybody knows everybody who lives on Green Street. You're going away for the weekend, you'll ask me, can you water my plants or make sure that this happens in my yard or whatever? No problem. I need a ride to go to the auto place to get new tires on my car. Can you drive me there? Or I'm going for a doctor's appointment and I won't be able to see when I get out because they put drops in my eyes. We all help each other. And the thing is that we all talk about stuff all the time. And then usually something comes out of that where, okay, so why don't we ask for this? Why don't we do this? And maybe it's something that we need my parents growing up in New York described the fact that they lived in a huge city. And yet in their block, the square block around them and that, people talked to each other. They knew everybody. They helped each other out. They watched their children. All of these things. Maybe we need to return to that sort of neighbor to neighbor, just talking on a regular basis. Find that 5 minutes to say something to your neighbor when you walk by them. We've gotten into, I know there's a lot written all about nuclear families and isolation, but I really do think that has become culturally how people interact. Or don't interact with their society at large. The engagement just isn't there. And it's also, we are at a point, I think, in our history where no one coming before us didn't work hard. People have always worked hard in this country. But not at 2 and 3 jobs all of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, if given the choice of going to a town hall meeting or babysitting and earning some money, what would you take? And because it's a necessity, young people going, one of the things is, young people going away to college. I mean, I had the great advantage of the national student defense loans, which were 2% interest. Okay. And it just didn't cost that much. I mean, I thought it cost a lot of money to go to school, but relative, it really wasn't. And I had a New York State Regent Scholarship money. It doesn't exist anymore. They did away with that. My older sister went through graduate school and got a master's degree, 100% paid for by New York State Scholarship, Regent Scholarship.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist anymore for young people.
No.
And what happens is they do go places where it's cheaper. They make choices for college and that, rather than, perhaps more local schools. And they're in debt.
Yes.
And it's a huge burden. I mean, I feel badly. I don't really have a solution for that other than to encourage them to look more to schools such as going and spending your first 2 years at Suffolk Community College and then transitioning into a bachelor's degree somewhere else. Yeah. It's not, Suffolk Community College offers some tremendous programs. It's a great community resource. And for many of our kids, they can transition into college. It's a different experience for them.
There's a lot more people going to college now than back then. And maybe not. It doesn't have to be for everyone either. There might be other ways And I have debt from college too, and it's a challenge, but yeah, I'm not quite sure what the answer is in terms of that.
Well, I think a lot of college majors can be structured in a way that is very similar to apprenticeship training in the construction trades, where rather than the big rush to get a 4-year degree, and then if you need something beyond that, all of that, is have a program where it's a combination of didactic as well as paid work in your field. You want to become an educator. From the first year, you're in the classroom, regardless of what it is that you have to do, but you also get paid for that. And so you are earning some money that will offset some of the costs that you can do. And you come out of, let's say it would take a bit longer, probably 5 years to get a bachelor's degree because of the work 1 semester, school semester. But you come out with work experience, and somewhere along the line, ooh, I really don't want to teach. Or I do, or this is what I'd like to do. And it gives you an opportunity to also explore occupations, which is something that I don't think enough of younger individuals get an opportunity to do, to really understand. For example, if I was to say to you, why don't you think about a career in agriculture? And you would say, doing what? This is like doing what? I don't want to pick lettuce. No, I'm not suggesting that's the only career you can have. Think career, not job. Okay, and that sort of thing. But it's there isn't that time to explore, because it's get the degree, then start paying it back and get a job and that. And I think we've sort of taken the joy out of developing as a person. With
that creative thought. It's kind of like, just follow this path and you're going to get these courses, this done, and go on this way. Whereas there's not that creative thinking part anymore.
Which was fun. Yeah. That's what made school fun. I mean, as a kid, I loved going to school. I just loved going to school. Yes, it took me 5 years to get an undergraduate degree. And then it took me only 2 years to get a master's. But I waited 10 years before I did that. And I just did, all of this different work stuff, and to decide what it was I wanted to do. It was, I will say my years in Salt Lake City were fabulous from the point of view of my exposure to a whole bunch of different things that I never, ever would have thought of doing. So it was just, but I think the creativity is we need to get back to that. Otherwise, we're going to be little automatons.
Yes, definitely. And then I just had one other question, because I know you touched on transportation, and that's a big subject out here. And I know that the Long Island Railroad is something that could be used, and I know that's been talked about, like a transit hub in Riverhead. I'm not sure what's happening with that.
It's kind of just gone off to the side. It's murmurs. It's not main conversation anymore. I think that what we really need to and to push on is that we get an opportunity such as they put in on the South Fork. They now have the train that goes from, I think it's Spionk, Remsenburg, out to Montauk. Southampton, or Montauk goes all the way out to Montauk. But it's basically a worker train. Yes. Okay, people come there and you can do things, and there are people who get on the train there and they have their bicycles with them, because when they get off, they bike to the place where they have to work. I think it opens up more opportunities. The argument for not doing emulating the same thing here on the North Fork is that we don't have the volume. We don't have the trade parade that goes there. But I think that if we could have workers, there are many people who on a daily basis go out to vineyards, period. We have more vineyards here than they have on the South Fork. More vineyards here, working there, and have a combination of using the Long Island Railroad and then the Suffolk County Transit Authority to transport people to and from places. First of all, would perhaps engage different types of development for business enterprises out here. And secondly, have people realize that they can live and work here because the transportation and because the cost of transportation with your own vehicle is very costly. The concept of carpooling has never really taken off.
No.
We're too independent for that. I know. I'm sorry I need my own car, and you can't sit and eat bagels in my car. Whatever. Whatever it is that people have, the thing that makes it difficult. But I do think that regionally we should sit down. Shelter Island, South Hold, Riverhead should sit down with Long Island Railroad and say, let's try this.
Yeah.
Okay. See what can happen with it. Because the South Fork one is a phenomenal success.
Yes.
And we have more and more of the Suffolk County bus service. They're changing the routes. They're limiting the routes. I mean, and it's the sort of thing where, yes, they have the buses where if I have a bicycle, I could put on the bike rack. But guess what? If the 3 bikes are on the bike rack, not only do I not get on that bus, they pass me by.
Yes.
Me and my bicycle. So it's coming to grips with there needs to be a different pattern for out here. You may do something different in Brookhaven. You may do something different in Babylon. But this is what we need out here. And do we have, and really finding out factually, do we have the workforce that's a commuter workforce every day? They run the train at, what's the first train out is like at 4:30 in the morning or something.
Something like that. The one out of Greenport is at like 4 or something.
And there's people on it.
Yes.
People
going into Manhattan.
That's right. And there is that. How large is that population? Has it grown since COVID? Have we really looked at that? But I think, again, it's sitting down and taking the time to collect our facts, meet with the agencies that could impact on something positive, and work with that. To me, that's what needs to be done.
And just within Riverhead, get the service more frequent out to there, even if it wasn't coming all the way out to Greenport. But it just seems like the limitation in service and the lack of bus lines is not good for the community out here. And we see that in the summer and the fall and spring.
We need it. And the will of, someone has to be blunt and say, there's a workforce that travels every day, and they are very diverse. You cannot make a decision based on the fact that you think it's only going to be people of color who will be using this transportation system. It simply isn't true.
Yeah.
I know that's very blunt and that doesn't really get you anywhere, but that sort of cloud in the room to discussion needs to be pushed away. It needs to be dispensed. This isn't a giveaway for, the Spanish-speaking population on the North Fork. It's not that at all. It's not a charity act or anything like that. It's a necessity. You want to be able to get up on any day of the week and travel to your favorite deli or coffee shop in the town of Riverhead and not have it take you 25 minutes because of the traffic. Well, this may be a solution for it.
Yes.
People still are going to be moving. We still need to move people because of what we have out here, the industries and the needs. And we've just got to get past that.
Definitely. No, and then just lastly, I ask people if there was any last-minute thoughts or things you'd like to say that we haven't touched on or talked about.
I don't really think that. No, you were very comprehensive in your questions. I just, as I said, started out with, I'm just really very honored to have been asked to participate in this. It's been very, very enjoyable. And I will continue to be the curmudgeon in my community. And I have been for the past 25 years.
No, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on today and share your story and for all the work you've done and continue to do in the community. It's really important, and I want to thank you for coming on today.
Thank you. Very much appreciated.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 155 with Angela De Vito. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.